So I had the recent opportunity to visit Springfield Armory, which is now the Springfield Armory National Historic Site, which is part of the National Park System. Of course, located in Springfield, Massachusetts, founded in 1777, which was one of the main producers of military firearms in the United States. Around that time, you had its sister site, Harper's Ferry, located in Virginia. And it was really interesting just seeing all the prototypes, all the different manufacturing techniques here. Of course, Springfield is known for everything from the Springfield 1903 to the M1 Garand. It produced a large number of early experimental firearms, had a lot of interesting early developments in firearms technology, such as the Blanchard lathe, which I'll show you here in a few minutes. But it had some pretty cool stuff, but it went through originally a lot of these early firearms, even predating the Springfield Armory. Things such as wheel locks, flint locks, matchlock, some early prototype pistols, even weapons going back to the Jamestown era, which is really cool. Right here we're looking at rifles that were pretty much customized during the American Civil War by individual soldiers. It has a really interesting sort of introductory video, movie theater in the actual on the actual site. Now, Springfield Armory itself, the National Historic Site, is just the main headquarters building on what used to be a much larger site. So right now I believe it's a technical university, but all the surrounding buildings in that square, if you will, were part of the actual production site. So you're talking about producing tens of thousands of firearms at the peak of World War II. And then eventually around, I think it was 1968, let me double check that. Yeah, 1968, they shut down Springfield Armory because they preferred private manufacturing of firearms with, the M16 era, AR-15, where you had Colt and other private manufacturers were the main producers of the United States military's firearms. But anyway, really cool collection at this site. If you're ever driving through Massachusetts, definitely get a chance to go in and see what they have. This is the gun organ, which was pretty cool to see, of course. And then they take you through some of the early breech-loading firearms. Here's some 1873 trapdoors, which were pretty interesting, some early prototypes, and then, the 30-40 Krag, of course. Then you get into the repeating rifles. And then we move on to, the Springfield, the 1903. Adopted by the United States military. Of course, they don't show the P-17s, which were more common in the First World War than the 1903 Springfields, but really interesting, of course, and they have a long military history, not just in the First World War, but civilian use, competition use, and World War II use. And then they had some of the prototype stuff, such as the Pedersen device, which was originally supposed to be used in the 1919 offensive in the First World War, kind of turned the 1903 into a kind of a trench sweeper. Now we're moving to the Garand section, where they had a lot of some of these early prototype receivers, including a bullpup M1 Garand, which was quite interesting. It certainly doesn't look very ergonomic. What's interesting is that Springfield was actually able to produce from 1936 to 1957 4.5 million just general purpose Garands. And of course there were other Garands contracted to Winchester and International Harvester, but quite a few, a majority of them were made at Springfield Armory. John C. Garand obviously was Canadian, but he came to Springfield Armory in 1919 to begin working and developing a semi-automatic rifle for the United States military. Couldn't sell the design to the British or the Canadians, but when he developed it, But the United States military was certainly looking for a semi-automatic rifle. Here we have some, I believe, a D version of the M1 Garand. So I know a lot of the prototypes had detachable magazines on the bottom, and of course folding stocks. But yeah, some quite interesting history here if you get a chance. Here's the evolution of how they made the front sights for the Garand. The little peephole that you can look out of, cut into a wheel and then into segments, and then further developed from there. Here are the landmark M1s. Here we see landmark M1s. So M1 number 1, of course. 100,000, 2 million, 3 million, and so on, which is pretty neat to see.
And then the last one was completed in May of 1952 after 6 million.
And then we're revisiting the Pedersen device put in the 1903 Springfield.
So how many of these were issued?
What's interesting is that most of these were destroyed in a giant fire because Springfield didn't want to pay for the storage space, so they basically took 50,000 of them and threw them into a fire and destroyed all of them except for a few. So if you're lucky enough to own one, that's a pretty cool thing, and it would be even more interesting to see it work. I don't know if there's any videos out there, but then this is sort of the conclusion of Springfield's production when they closed it down in 1968.
So that's where they would put where would they put the model stock? They'd put it on one of these, and then they would put the unshaven stock, and it would just imitate that.
Springfield also not only created muskets in its early age, but it also created howitzers. It had brass production, paper patches and balls, and pretty much any assorted equipment that would go along with firearms. But yeah, this is just a quick look at the Springfield National Historic Site, so check it out.